Hello everyone and welcome to episode 7 of my N-Gage layout build. Apologies if my voice is a little bit harsh, I'm just on the mend from COVID at the minute. But with that said, in this episode we're going to look at adding some finishing touches and detail around the layout. So let's get started. The goods yard has some nice ground cover and a little bit of vegetation already, but still it's looking rather barren. Let's start by adding some cars and a goods vehicle to liven the place up. I got these nice little N-Gage vehicles from Oxford Diecast. The issue here being that they are all far too nice. We're going to spend a little bit of time roughing them up and adding some age and weathering before placing them onto the layout. I'm going to show you the full process on the lorry on the right hand side, as that's going to be the most weathered of the bunch. The first stage is to glue the axles of the lorry in place so that the wheels don't keep spinning forever and ever when we're trying to paint it. And to do this I just use a little bit of super glue on each axle and then give that some time to dry. And once the wheels are stuck in place, the first thing I'm going to do is rub the lorry on this sanding stick here, and what that's going to do is it's going to flatten the bottom of the tyres, which means A, it looks a little bit more realistic because it simulates the tyres being squished, and also when we come to glue it down to the layout we'll have a larger surface area to stick the lorry down on. So for stage 2 we're going to begin with some actual weathering, and this is kind of a generic first level dirt/paint chip sort of layer. I've mixed up a dark brown greyish colour and I'm applying it with a sponge to give me a nice random effect. You can use a paintbrush, but I find the sponge is faster and also gives you more of a random effect. So once we've given the sponge weathering a little bit of time to dry, we're going to move on to adding a dark brown wash. Again, this is just building up on that general layer of dirt and grime, and it also takes a little bit of the shine off of the paint of these die-cast vehicles. I apply the wash pretty liberally with a large brush, and I tend to use an older one because these wash effects don't really require a high quality brush. And then once I've given the wash a little bit of time to dry, I like to come in with a cotton bud and remove some of it from the raised areas of the model so that the dirt and the grime looks like it's concentrated in all the kind of cracks and crevices and hard to reach areas. It makes the dirt look more realistic and also helps to add a bit more of a sense of depth to the model. So the truck's already starting to look an awful lot better, and we're going to move on to a technique now which may seem a little bit advanced, but in actual fact it's super simple. You may notice that the windscreen wipers on cars don't actually wipe the whole windscreen. They leave a very telltale shape on the screen where just the arc of the wipers has been, and in the corners the dirt remains. So what I'm doing here to simulate that is I'm making a tiny little mask out of Tamiya masking tape, and I'm shaping it to just cover the white portion of the screen, and I'm kind of guessing at that based upon where the wipers are on this little die-cast model. What this means is as I add further weathering, the area underneath the masking tape will stay clean and it will look like the wipers have actually cleared that portion of the windscreen. Next, we're going to start adding some pigment powders to simulate heavier dirt and rust on the vehicle. I move in stages between adding the pigment powder dry, adding them mixed with some pigment fixer to make a kind of a stodgy mix, and wiping everything away with cotton bud. Light brown looks like dirt, dark red becomes rust, dark brown looks more like wet mud. It's one of these things you kind of just have to experiment with a little bit and see what you like the look of. The bottom half of the truck gets the most attention as that's where all the dirt and rust would tend to build up. And the thing about pigment powders to keep in mind is that we can use them to actually add texture, unlike washes. So we can actually see material building up in the mudguards and things like that. And it's a true 3D effect, which is something interesting and something to keep in mind. And that was the last stage of the weathering. So with everything done, it's simply a case of removing the mask from the windscreen and the lorry is complete. Personally, I think it looks suitably grimy. At the end of the day, it's all a personal preference though, so you can weather things as much or as little as you would like. All the cars got a similar process, but to much less of a degree, because obviously they're people's personal cars, which tend to be kept a bit cleaner than a big commercial lorry. And with all that painting complete, it's just a case of gluing them down onto the layout in the position that we want. So there we have it. With just the addition of some cars, already the place is looking like it has some real life and some real action happening there. I'm really happy with how these turned out, and I definitely recommend the Oxford diecast cars. They are a little bit pricey, but considering how absolutely tiny they are, they're actually pretty good quality and have some nice detail to them. So that's the vehicle sorted, but our quest for more detail continues. We're going to jump around a little bit here, but the general theme is we're going to be moving around the layout, fixing a few errors and adding more details where they're appropriate. So with that said, let's continue. So one thing I would like to tick off the list here is, in a couple of areas we have some rather unsightly visible magnets. Particularly this one here on the middle rail. With the magnets being silver and shiny, they really do stand out. So to fix this, we're just simply going to add some fresh ballast over the top, and once it's all fixed down and dry, we're going to come in with the hoover and remove the excess. With that little bit of cleanup done, we're going to look at adding some smaller details to the goods yard. Here we have some little plastic barrels that came on a sprue in a little kit, and I thought I'd just take the opportunity to highlight what a difference it makes spending some time painting the details of it on our layouts. It'd be really tempting to just slap some grey paint on and call it a day, as the left barrel here shows, but that's not really getting the most out of the detail that we're adding. If we go one over to the right hand side, that we can see what the addition of a black wash and then a light grey dry brush does. You can really see the 3D shape of the barrel and the bands around it much more clearly. One step further to the right from that, we just did some very simple sponge weathering with a little bit of brown paint. And this is where it starts to become more of a personal preference thing, because maybe you don't want your barrels to look all horrible and decrepit, and in that case the second stage here is absolutely fine. But the third stage we've added some paint chips, and then the fourth stage we've added a little bit of brown pigment powder around the bottom, just to simulate dust being kicked up around the barrel and starting to collect on it. I want the goods yard to look reasonably messy, so I've cut up some rails and thin metal rod, and we're just going to sort of pile those up as debris in some corner somewhere. As these are metal, they don't take paint particularly well, so whenever I can, I prefer to spray paint metal parts, and in this case I'm using the Rail Match Sleeper Grime, which is the same colour we used to weather the track itself. After a little bit of thinking, I decided I wanted to add a properly run down vehicle somewhere to the goods yard. Maybe it's something the workers used to use many years ago but has since been left to rot. Either way, it's a vehicle that's not being used anymore and is kind of almost returning to the ground. Once again, this little fella here is from Oxford Diecast, and I almost feel bad about destroying it, but I'm going to go very, very heavy on the weathering here. As you can see, the old girl has seen more than a few years of disrepair. I've removed the wheel, broken the bumper, dented the wheel arches, and really gone in on the rust using more reddish and orangey browns around the sort of rear bed and the base of the body to show the rust really coming through. And I've also sanded the wheels down a lot more than I did on the truck and the other cars, just to try and show that they're really, really flat from years of just being left outside with no care or attention. So here are all the bits together. I've added a ladder, lots more barrels, some pallets, and we have the rails there as well. And now it's just a case of trying to find a place for everything and getting it glued down. And gluing it down to the layout is relatively simple. I just use super glue applied with a toothpick. Most of the time was actually just spent double checking exactly where I wanted to put everything. I put most of the barrels in the fenced area, which I imagine would be some kind of storage zone. The ladder went up against the rear of the building, and I actually ended up putting the rails on the other end of the layout near the tunnel, and put the rusty truck at the end of the car park where it's just visible. Things in the goods yard are looking a lot better now that we've added those details, and when I was putting them all together I really thought it was going to be enough. But looking at it, I still think it looks a little bit empty. So we're going to continue adding some more features and details to draw the eye. Now to start that off, we're going to look at a little bit of 3D printing. Have you guys ever seen these giant cable spool things? There's some in this old industrial estate I've seen when I've been on the train, and I really wanted to make an N-gauge version, but was struggling to figure a way to do it nice and reliably. It's actually surprisingly hard to make perfect circles that small, and particularly in a material that's super thin. What I actually ended up doing was 3D printing the wooden part in two halves. Now, I have what's called an FDM printer, which is the really, really basic kind and normally not very good for making models because the detail's not quite there. But in this case, because the spools are such a simple geometric shape, I could actually print them out really, really tiny, and with just a little bit of work with a bit of sandpaper, I could clean them up and get rid of that 3D printed texture. Unfortunately, the paint doesn't seem to stick to the 3D printed plastic particularly well, but it's not the end of the world, and as long as you don't handle them too much, then the paint will stay on just fine. And as you can see, once I had the basic paint color down, I used a dry brush technique to try and simulate a little bit of a wood texture on there. And for the cables themselves, I found this stuff that jewelry makers use for bracelets and things, I presume. It's 0.5mm copper wire that is coloured black. You can get it in whatever colour you want, but obviously black makes sense here. And that equals about 75mm in real life, which is a pretty chunky cable, but I don't think it looks too outrageous in N-gauge. And yeah, it's a really satisfying process of wrapping this metal wire around the spools, and I think it looks pretty good when it's done. So once I'd made those spools, I actually ended up making a smaller set as well, still on the 3D printer using the same process, but I just changed the wire for 0.2mm copper wire, and I also made up some more rails and bits of pipe as well, which we're going to scatter about the place. So once again, it's just a case of being very patient and going around slowly and getting everything glued down with super glue once I found the right place for it and somewhere where I'm happy for it. With the odd shape of some of this detail, I wasn't 100% confident that the super glue was going to be enough to hold it, so what I've done is, after everything is down in the right place, I've come in with a little bit of extra ground cover and built up a small layer of dirt and texture around some of the detail, and then glued that down as if it was ballast, and that makes everything feel much more secure. So there we go, with that second round of detail complete, I think things are looking just right. Let's have a look at some images of all the hard work we've put in. So there we go, with just the addition of some very basic details and a few vehicles, I feel like we've really transformed this side of the layout. I've said before that I think the human element is really important, and all of these little details help to tell that story of the fact that there are people who are working here and people who actually interact with this building, and there's a reason for it to exist. Having these details as well means I can get the camera down really low and really up close, and things still kind of look realistic. I know the cars aren't the best in the world when you get this close, but it's a lot better than just looking at an empty gravel car park. And here we have the C-Class pulling away after having the wagons filled up, and off it goes into the right hand side of the layout. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.